Chapter 2101. It's useless. She looked at him and her tears fell one by one, hurting his heart. If something happens to Mumu, I won't be happy. I'll live in the shadow for the rest of my life. She closed her eyes and threw herself into his arms again, hugging him tightly. However, she only hugged him for a while and then pushed him away. Yi Muyun reached out to grab her, but he couldn't. Instead, she snatched the gun from his hand. Cher walked toward Zhou Chongguang step by step until she was in front of him. She raised the gun at him and with a bang the only bullet went through Zhou Chongguang's leg. Blood gushed out, it splashed all over Cher, and there was some hot blood on her little face, which made her face look as pale as a piece of paper. You owe me this. Pay it back with your blood. Her voice was very faint. Zhou Chongguang, you win? Zhou Chongguang bent down, but he didn't fall down. He just looked at her. Cher didn't look at him again. She turned her head and looked at Yi Muyun in the night. His eyes were full of shock. It was too surprising that he didn't manage to catch her at the first moment. Shui-er looked at him carefully as if she was trying to carve him into her heart. Then she turned around and left, not looking back. Yi Muyun quickly stepped forward, but he felt a pain in the back of his head. His eyes were a little dazed and he stood there for a while unwillingly. Finally he fell down. Cher abruptly turned her head around. Under the moonlight, her tears were still wet. Yi Liangqiu closed her eyes and slowly knelt down. At this time, she admitted that she was selfish. Perhaps Muyun was right. She had brought Cher here as a final preparation. There was no way Schwenger didn't know that. She was just helping him. I'm sorry, Yi Liangqiu murmured, but she didn't know who she was talking to. Was it Cher or Muyun? She was actually shocked because of Muyun's choice. Zhou Chongguang slowly stood up. His leg was bleeding but he didn't care. He looked at Yi Muyun and smiled faintly. Finally, just like him, he had also lost the most important thing to him. Cher disappeared. She disappeared on this very night. Yi Muyun searched the entire world but he couldn't find her. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. It was so long that he felt like he had given up. It was so long that Qin Mu came of age. It was so long that Qin Mu and Zhou Chongguang got married. It was so long that Zhou Chongguang became one of the most powerful people in B City. Tang Cher still hadn't shown up. Later he thought she will not appear again. Later he had a girlfriend. She was beautiful, gentle and cute. He vaguely thought that since he had a girlfriend she probably wouldn't have to hide from him anymore. He thought that from the moment he woke up that day he hated her. He hated her choice. He hated her for leaving without saying goodbye. This kind of hatred faded day by day. It faded into the trivial life and the busy work. However, it was engraved in his bones. No one could see it. It was the 8th year of her disappearance. Yi Muyun became the CEO of Boyi. He held 20% of Boyi's shares. He was the most respected man in B City. All the influential people in B City were fawning over him, but he still felt lonely. He lived in the suite of GM Hotel all year round. He rarely went home and even less returned to Pei Yuan. Even if he went back occasionally he would only visit Tang Yu and Pei Chichi. He would leave after a simple meal. Chapter 2102. At this moment he was standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window of his office on the top floor of Boyi Hotel, looking down at B City beneath his feet. His heart was empty. He asked Gu Zhe about the stock market, his voice sounding a little tired. Gu Zhe said quietly, Mr. Yi, Miss Song just called to ask you out for dinner. Yi Muyun didn't reply. Instead he said mildly, still no news? Gu Zhe was stunned for a moment. Then he understood who Mr. Yi was asking about. After a moment of silence he said, someone saw her in New York before, but after looking for her, there was no news. Yi Muyun lowered his head, took out a cigarette and lit it. After a long time he exhaled. Uncle Tang wants to help her. How can we find her? He finally turned his head around. His face was clear and handsome. Compared to 8 years ago he was a little thinner. He looked very indifferent, without much of a human touch. Gu Zhe pursed his lips and didn't say anything. It wasn't his place to interrupt. Back then Gu Mei was sentenced to 3 years. After she came out, she became Zhou Chongguang's secretary. Gu Zhe didn't know if there was anything between them and Gu Mei had never mentioned it. But these few years, Gu Mei and Zhou Chongguang were indeed very close. Fortunately, Zhou Chongguang was smart. Nothing happened between him and Qin Mu, and they looked like a normal couple. Gu Zhe would occasionally see them. Zhou Chongguang was as considerate and warm to Qin Mu as he was in the past. However, Gu Zhe felt that Qin Mu seemed to have become indifferent and was different from before. This was just his opinion as an outsider. Because of Gu Mei, he more or less kept an eye on Qin Mu. As he kept an eye on her, a few years passed. Time passed quickly. Guzay forgot that he was 30 years old and alone. However, since Boss Yi had a girlfriend, he looked more lonely than him who didn't have a girlfriend. After waiting for a long time for his response, Yi Muyun said indifferently, "Make an appointment with her at 8 tonight." As he spoke, he walked to his desk, put out his cigarette, grabbed his coat and walked out of the office. His secretary said goodbye to him. Along the way, the staff looked at him and respectfully called him Mr. Yi. However, all of this had nothing to do with her. His life had nothing to do with her anymore. When he got off the elevator, Yi Muyun looked at himself in the mirror and said in a low voice, "Why? Why aren't you back yet?" But no one could answer him. He laughed at his own stupidity with a desolate look in his eyes. It had been 8 years. She had left for 8 years without a word. She had never returned. What was he waiting for? He laughed at himself and walked out of the elevator. The black sports car sped all the way back to the Pei residence. Qin Imo moved out of Yun City, Qin Mu got married, and the two kids were studying abroad. Only Qin Anlin and Yi Liangqiu lived here. Yi Muyun would go back about half a month. Sometimes he would just sit there for a while and then leave. Back then no one forced him or share, but the knot in their hearts was difficult to untie. During the 8 years he thought that Qin Mu had probably noticed something, but she had never said anything. Perhaps Mu Mu had grown up and no longer needed anyone to protect her. And the person he wanted to protect was long gone. Yi Muyun got out of the car and walked to the main house. He didn't expect that Qin Mu would also be at his parents' house, so he slowed down. Qin Mu had already noticed him. The 22-year-old Qin Mu was more gentle than when she was young, and there was peace in her eyes. Those who hadn't come into contact with her would never know that Qin Mu had died several times in her teens. Chapter 2103. Yi Muyun had mixed feelings about his sister. He didn't blame her, but he didn't want to see her all the time, because his heart ached when he saw her. He indulged Zhou Chongguang's meteoric rise, and that man was very smart to mind his own business. He was really good to Qin Mu before and after marriage, and he was like a model husband. But in private, Zhou Chongguang was not without women. At least Gu Mei was. At least, the little star that Zhou Chongguang was raising looked like Cher. When Gu Zhe showed him the photo, he saw it. He didn't care. If Zhou Chongguang was Qin Mu's dream, then she was the one who woke up from this dream. Therefore Yi Muyun didn't ask much about their affairs. Now that he saw her, he just smiled and said, "You're back?" In early autumn, Qin Mu stood under an orange tree in the yard. She was wearing a light purple blouse and a beige dress, and her slightly curly brown hair reached her waist. She was already extremely beautiful, at least much more beautiful than the little star. Yi Muyun thought indifferently. Qin Mu saw him coming over and reached out to hold his arm. Yi Muyun was stunned for a moment. Over the years, although they were not unfamiliar with each other, they were not very close. At first, Mumu also asked where Cher was going, but he couldn't answer. Later she stopped asking. After a long time, everyone was used to not having Tang Cher by Yi Muyun's side. Only he was not used to it. It took him 10 years to get to her side, and it took Cher one night for her to leave him. But it took him 8 years and he still couldn't forget it. Maybe it would be like a thorn that couldn't be pulled out in this life. Who knew? "Brother," Qin Mu smiled, "I heard from Gu Zhe that you have an appointment tonight." Yi Muyun's girlfriend was called Song Karen. She was 24 years old. Her appearance was as sweet as her name, and she was also well behaved. However, Qin Mu did not think her brother liked her. At least, she had never seen her brother smile sincerely or look at Song Karen with such loving eyes. She thought in her brother's heart he still hasn't forgotten Cher. Yi Muyun was a little absent-minded because Qin Mu called him brother. In the past there was a little girl who called him brother for 10 years. Even when they had sex for the first time, she cried and called him brother when she was in so much pain. He kissed her soothingly, telling her that it was her brother who wanted her, and she endured it. Yi Muyun lowered his eyes and said indifferently, "Qin Mu, why don't you focus on your marriage and manage it well?" Qin Mu looked up at him. After a while she said quietly, "Brother, I want to divorce Zhou Chongguang." Yi Muyun tilted his head and stared at her. He stared at her for a long time. "Brother, don't make things difficult for him after we divorce." Qin Mu reached out and hugged his arm, leaning towards him. "I'm not helping him. I just don't want you to worry about me anymore." Yi Muyun's gaze was still fixed. "I'm fine." Qin Mu smiled faintly. "I just woke up from a dream. This dream lasted for 8 years. Actually, from the 5th year or the 6th year or the night of their wedding she felt that this was a nightmare, it should be over." Yi Muyun looked at her carefully. After a while he asked softly, "Why?" Chapter 2104. Imuyun didn't say anything and just rubbed his sister's hair. She had grown up and had her own ideas. If she wanted to continue living like this, he wouldn't object. If she wanted a divorce, he wouldn't object either. As for Zhou Chongguang, let him be. Perhaps he should thank Zhou Chongguang, that bastard, for letting Mumu start a new life. Qin Mu leaned on his shoulder. After a long time she said softly, "Brother, she's back." Imuyun's body was obviously stiff. She didn't need to see to know how shocked he was. Over the years, almost no one dared to mention Cher in front of her brother, and she was the same. She vaguely knew that Cher's departure had something to do with her, but she didn't dare to ask. She admitted that she was timid and hid in her own world, unwilling to come out. But when she heard that Cher was back, she decided to end it all. Her brother was not married and Cher should be single. Qin Mu took a step back and smiled faintly. "I'll be leaving first. Brother, let's have a meal together another day. We haven't had a meal together for a long time." Imuyun came to his senses and nodded. "Okay, I'll ask Guze to make an appointment." There was a hint of a smile in Qin Mu's eyes. "Fortunately, I didn't ask your secretary Zheng Sini to make an appointment." Imuyun heard the meaning in her tone and lowered his eyes. "She is just a capable secretary." Qin Mu sighed and said, "Brother, don't you find that Zheng Sini is much more beautiful than before?" Although she was not stunning, she did lose weight. She was wearing a secretary's suit and had her black straight hair tied up, which made her look like a uniform. Imuyun looked at his sister and didn't answer. In his eyes, a secretary was just a secretary. She was just a walking machine. It didn't matter if she looked good on the outside. As for why he kept Zheng Sini, he couldn't quite remember how capable she was when she graduated. All he remembered was that she was someone who had connections with Tang Cher, so he kept her. Seeing his attitude, Qin Mu didn't say anything more. Obviously, her brother didn't mean it and there was no need to say more. After pausing for a moment, she got into the driver's car and left. In the car, Qin Mu thought that this kind of thing should be more formal. It would be better to talk about it in his office. So he told the driver, "Uncle Zhao, let's go to Glory Light." Old Zhao was stunned for a moment. Then he said, "It's Mrs.'s first time going to Sir's company. Let me navigate it." Back then, when Qin Mu got married, the people around her were all sent by the Qin family. They were more or less afraid that she would be wronged. As for Zhou Chongguang, he never said anything. He probably didn't take it to heart. Qin Mu grunted in acknowledgement. Old Zhao quickly navigated the car and changed the route. When the black Audi arrived at the Glory Light building, it didn't cause a commotion. The car was too low-key. "I'll go up for a while. Wait for me here, Uncle Zhao." Qin Mu's tone was gentle, and there was even a faint smile on her face. Old Zhao followed her out of the car. "I'll smoke a few cigarettes." Actually, he was worried. It wasn't that he couldn't see it. It was just that Zhou Chongguang had never brought outside matters or women to Mississippi. Everyone tacitly agreed. Chapter 2105. Gu Mei picked it up and told the receptionist to let her go upstairs. The receptionist didn't suspect anything and let Qin Mu go upstairs. As soon as she left, the two receptionists started whispering to each other, "I didn't expect Secretary Gu to have such a classy friend. One look and I can tell that she comes from a good family. She doesn't look like a prostitute at all." "That's right. Zhou Zong's eyes aren't even half as bright as this girl. Lin Shui is upstairs now. Maybe Secretary Gu feels uncomfortable and wants to talk to her friend." The other person laughed. "Zhou Zong seems to have neglected Secretary Gu recently. He's a man. How many years do you expect him to play with him?" "That's true." Their words more or less reached Qin Mu's ears. Qin Mu only smiled faintly and didn't say anything. Lin Shui was here. That was perfect. On the top floor, Gu Mei's hands trembled slightly as she held her phone. She knew that Qin Mu wasn't looking for her. She was probably checking on her. But she didn't stop her. Instead, she let Qin Mu come upstairs. Something was probably going on in Zhou Chongguang's office right now. Gu Mei looked at the red numbers on the elevator and pursed her lips. In the end, she chose to leave. With a ding, the elevator door opened. Qin Mu slowly walked out and walked towards Zhou Chongguang's office. The door was unlatched. It was probably because he had nothing to fear. Everything he did was unbridled. Just as she imagined, the man she had once been deeply infatuated with was making love with another young woman. His face was extremely distorted and his jade-like eyes, and that woman was trying very hard to please him. The scene was unbearable. But she looked very calm. It was as if she had waited for this day for a long time. It was as if it was normal for this to happen. She didn't make any noise, so the man and woman who were immersed in love didn't immediately notice. After about 5 seconds, Zhou Chongguang suddenly looked up and saw Qin Mu standing at the door. His face became even more twisted. He almost immediately left the woman's body and pulled up his clothes. Qin Mu had counted for him. From the beginning to the end it was no more than 10 seconds. She even secretly thought that he only had 10 seconds of patience for the woman under him. He didn't even bother to comfort her. What did this woman want from him? His money or his appearance? 28-year-old Zhou Chongguang. She naturally knew what her husband's figure was like. She had a married life with him, but it wasn't frequent. It was about once a week. After seeing how ruthless he was towards this woman, she thought to herself that the weekly session between them was considered a form of coping. Her husband was so passionate about other women. Just as Qin Mu and Zhou Chongguang were looking at each other, the woman lying on the bed softly asked, "Chongguang, what's wrong?" Zhou Chongguang threw her clothes to her. "Put them on and leave now." Lin Shui's face was filled with shock, but she soon noticed that his gaze was not on her face. She was stunned and followed his gaze to the door. A beautiful girl was standing there. Lin Shui knew that she was Zhou Chongguang's wife. Lin Shui felt a little guilty. After all, she was stuck on the sofa by the Empress. She knew that Zhou Zong had no intention of getting a divorce, so she didn't dare to provoke the Empress. She obediently put on her clothes and looked at Zhou Chongguang lovingly for a while before leaving. Chapter 2106. Qin Mu smiled faintly and stretched out her hand to stop Lin Shui. Zhou Chongguang frowned. "Let her go. She has something to talk to me about." "Do you think that I want to make things difficult for her?" Qin Mu smiled faintly. "Zhou Chongguang, don't worry. I just want to tell her that it's okay to be a little ambitious because I'm going to divorce you." Lin Shui's mouth was agape, and she looked at Zhou Chongguang uneasily. "You go first." Zhou Chongguang's voice sounded strict. Lin Shui was a B-list celebrity, and she knew very well that it was not easy to get divorced from a wealthy family. At this moment, the best thing for her to do was to avoid this storm so that she could reap benefits in the future. Lin Shui left quickly, but Zhou Chongguang's brows were still furrowed. He looked at Qin Mu, who was standing at the door. "Why didn't you come in? Do you think it's dirty?" Qin Mu did not say a word, but walked in directly and sat opposite the sofa where they were having sex. There was still a lingering scent in the air. It was a little disgusting. "Open the window," Qin Mu said lightly. Zhou Chongguang did not move, and only stared at her with his deep eyes. 8 years had passed, and he had long changed from a sunny young man to a cruel businessman. His face was still handsome, but his aura was completely different. Qin Mu was not afraid of him. If he did not move, she could only move herself. She did not care about the image of her husband having sex with another woman, but it did not mean that she was willing to stay in such a space. She got up and was about to open the blinds herself, but she had only taken 2 steps when he grabbed her slender wrist and she fell into a firm embrace. There was a hint of anger in Zhou Chongguang's eyes. Qin Mu interpreted it as anger from embarrassment. He stared at her. "Just because of an insignificant woman? It doesn't matter whether she has it or not. Don't you know that, Zhou Chongguang?" Qin Mu's voice was gentle, just like her brown curly hair. Lin Shui, 26 years old, those eyes. "Zhou Chongguang, it's not easy to find so many similarities." She said it calmly, but his expression became a little gloomy. "You investigated me? No need. Everyone knew that the glorious Zhou Zong kept a small celebrity. Also, Zhou Zong has an affair with his secretary. I'm probably the only fool in the world who doesn't know about it." Qin Mu smiled faintly. "Or do you think that if you don't bring a woman home, I'll never know?" Zhou Chongguang's face darkened. He scratched his head but did not let go of her. "When did you find out?" "About 2 or 3 years ago," Qin Mu said quietly. "I forgot about it myself. Sorry." Ever since she saw him for the first time, she had no feelings for him, for his body, and for his weekly obligations as a couple. And he had never realized that she had never moaned during sex with him. Not even a sound. Perhaps it was because the woman outside had completely satisfied him, so when he was with her, he could handle it completely and only need to vent once. Just like he had always thought, she would be happy and satisfied if he gave her a little. In Zhou Chongguang's eyes and heart, Qin Mu couldn't leave him. So he never had to use his heart. Actually, he had already given his heart to someone else. Chapter 2107. Qin Mu didn't answer him immediately. She paused for a moment and said, "Maybe it's because I don't love him anymore, so it's not so unbearable." So that's why you only asked for a divorce 2 to 3 years later? Zhou Chongguang said sarcastically. Qin Mu shook her head. No. I just feel that it's meaningless to tie two people together who don't love each other. Zhou Chongguang narrowed his eyes and looked at her sharply. After a long while he went forward and pinched her sharp chin. He asked in a soft but dangerous tone, "Are you in love with someone else? Just like how you loved me back then, like a moth flying into a flame?" When he said that, he realized that he wasn't indifferent. He was even a little jealous. A man who attracted all her attention. Would she give herself to that man without any qualms? She was like a piece of wood under him, but in that man's arms she was passionate? Qin Mu looked at him with clear eyes. "Zhou Chongguang, whether I do or don't, I don't have to explain to you." She didn't want to talk to him about this because he wasn't worthy. What she wanted was a peaceful divorce. But her words ignited Zhou Chongguang's suppressed anger. In a man's heart, what she said was equivalent to admitting that she had an affair. Zhou Chongguang's Adam's apple kept moving as he stared at her gentle face. All these years she had been pampered and didn't let her see his dark side. She was well protected. Now she said that she was in love with someone else. Did she think that he, whose hands were stained with blood, was no longer worthy of her love? Zhou Chongguang didn't know what he was thinking. He didn't allow her to love someone else. So he pressed her head down violently and kissed her forcefully. Without giving her any chance to resist, he pressed her down on the sofa and exercised his rights as a husband. He remembered that the last time he had sex with her was half a month ago. When he hugged her last Saturday, she said that her period had come. It should be gone now. Just as he was flirting with another woman, he forcefully took her. Qin Mu screamed and struggled, but to no avail. Finally, his fiery passion was used on her. Finally, he was beastly to her for once. But she didn't feel anything at all. Instead, she felt disgusted and disgusted. She couldn't push him away. She couldn't resist him. She could only endure, without giving him any reaction. In the end, Zhou Chongguang let her go, feeling a little bored. He didn't tidy up his clothes. He just sat down casually, took a cigarette from the table and lit it. He took a deep breath and looked at Qin Mu, who was still lying on the bed. "You won't even let me touch you? Is that man really that good? Much better than me?" Zhou Chongguang couldn't help but ask. It would have been better if she didn't say it, but the moment she said it, his heart was filled with rage and he wished he could kill her. Actually, Qin Mu was very beautiful. But in bed he was indifferent to her. He knew he was doing it on purpose. He liked her body, but he didn't want to indulge in it. 8 years. 8 years didn't change anything except for her. She didn't love him anymore. She fell in love with someone else. "Tell me the name of your adulterer." He smoked slowly, still looking at her messy appearance. "I want to see who the man is that you've fallen in love with again." "No one." Qin Mu sat up and frowned because of her messy appearance. Chapter 2108. She didn't want to shower in his place, so she took a tissue and cleaned herself up. Her actions were very calm, as if she had just had sex outside. It was very normal. Zhou Chongguang more or less understood women. Today's matter, any woman would go crazy and fight with him. What's more, he forced her to have sex on the same sofa. What's more, his wife was the proud and arrogant young miss of the Qin family. However, she held it in and didn't seem too angry. Zhou Chongguang felt his throat choking. She really didn't care about him anymore. Qin Mu continued to speak in a flat tone. "No one. It's just that Zhou Chongguang, you're too dirty." Zhou Chongguang's heart felt as though it had been punched by a fist. He couldn't make a sound for a long time. "I've already signed the agreement. I won't be tainted by the glory. That house was given to me by my mother, so please move out." Qin Mu explained the divorce in an orderly manner. She was extremely calm. Zhou Chongguang scoffed coldly. "What's the point of keeping that house? Do you miss it?" "I'll sell it," Qin Mu told him honestly. At that moment he felt as though his throat was choked. At that moment the office door opened. Gu Mei stood at the door and was about to speak when Zhou Chongguang shouted angrily, "Scram!" Gu Mei was stunned. He had never been so rough with her. Qin Mu smiled faintly. "There's no need to avoid it, Zhou Chongguang. I've seen you naked before." Her words were gentle, but they hit the nail on the head. Zhou Chongguang's expression was terrible and Gu Mei was even more embarrassed. Gu Mei closed the door after a while. She could roughly guess what happened in the office. Zhou Chongguang had slept with Qin Mu right after he had sex with Lin Shui. What did that mean? Gu Mei knew better than anyone else that Qin Mu wasn't the only one who had changed over the years, but Zhou Chongguang as well. Her body was pressed against the door, and her heart was secretly thinking that this move of hers might be able to win in one move, but perhaps it would be a crushing defeat. She could tell that Qin Mu no longer loved Zhou Chongguang. If she loved him, she would not care and would not say sarcastic words so calmly. A woman he didn't love meant that he couldn't get her. What he couldn't get was the best. In the office, Zhou Chongguang tidied up his clothes. He looked at Qin Mu and moved his lips. Gu Mei and I are not what you think we are. You haven't slept with her, have you? Qin Mu looked at him and chuckled. Zhou Chongguang was a little embarrassed. Qin Mu, don't be so overbearing. You weren't like this in the past. There's no point in the past. Qin Mu lowered her eyes. Zhou Chongguang, let's part on good terms. It's been 8 years. The anger in your heart should have dissipated. His face instantly turned pale and his voice was so cold that ice beads could be seen. You know about it? You know that this marriage and the words you said to me are all for taking advantage of me, don't you? Qin Mu got up and took out a document from her bag. She pressed it on the table in front of him. Zhou Chongguang, I've signed on it. You can sign it. If you want to get Gu Mei or that little star, it's fine. Why make things difficult for each other? Zhou Chongguang's face became more and more unpleasant. After a long time, he said coldly, what if I want to make things difficult for you? Chapter 2109. The veins on Zhou Chongguang's forehead were popping out. When he went out this morning, all the servants at home had said goodbye to him respectfully. Even the cook had asked him what he wanted to eat for dinner, saying that it was for Madame. What the hell? Since when did Qin Mu know how to play these little tricks? Unbeknownst to him, they had been sleeping in the same bed for 2 years. He had always thought that he was the one dealing with her. But it turned out that she was the one who was perfunctory. She lay on the bed like a block of wood. She had never taken the initiative to kiss him. It wasn't because she was shy or unromantic, but because she had no desire for him. At this moment, Zhou Chongguang felt as though a bucket of cold water had been poured over him from head to toe. He gritted his teeth. I won't divorce. He took the agreement on the table and tore it into 2 without even looking at it. Then he threw it into the trash can. Qin Mu did not say anything. Instead, she spoke gently, you're probably too hot-tempered. If your body isn't satisfied, you can take your luggage and look for a presidential suite. Then you can find a woman that suits your taste. You don't have to force yourself to go home every day. And I don't have to pretend to wait for you. Zhou Chongguang's face darkened. Qin Mu. His voice was cold. Is this your true self? Using the word true self to describe how much I hate you in my heart. So, divorce is the right thing to do. Qin Mu advised him kindly. Zhou Chongguang glared at her. I'll get it later. But I won't get those women you're thinking of. He was a proud man. Even if she chased him away, he would not cling on. But he had never thought of divorce. How could Qin Mu not guess it? She sighed. Zhou Chongguang, I'm no longer of any use to you, Zhou Chongguang suddenly asked. So, you've never gotten pregnant? He had never noticed it before. After all, his heart was not with her. But now that he thought about it, they had been married for 4 years. He had never used a condom when he had sex with her. But his young body had never gotten pregnant even once. He had never thought about it before. But now he understood. Ever since they got married and had sex for the first time, she had wanted to leave him. Her first time was after she became an adult. The things she thought before didn't exist. She did not understand and was deceived by him. Qin Mu didn't deny it and nodded. Yes, we really don't need a child between us. She suddenly lowered her eyes and her long eyelashes trembled slightly. I don't want to be a mother either. When they got married, she was still a child and he actually didn't take much care of her. He just threw her to the servants and came home at night to sleep. Occasionally he would sleep with her. They had been married for 4 years and they were so unfamiliar with each other. It was ridiculous that he still thought that she still loved him. After hearing Qin Mu's words, Zhou Chongguang said thoughtfully, maybe your heart will settle down after you have a child. Today I didn't use a condom. You don't have to take the medicine. From now on we're going to have a baby, he said decisively. Qin Mu laughed again. This time it wasn't her usual gentle laugh. She laughed so hard that she almost cried, Zhou Chongguang, I want to divorce you. Have a baby. Let Gu Mei or one of those celebrities give birth to a baby for you. From B-City to France, I think there will be women who will be willing. Qin Mu was so angry that she laughed. Also, don't touch me in the future. Disgusting. She spat out softly. Because you are dirty. Chapter 2110. As she said that, she walked out and said calmly, "My lawyer will be here tomorrow. I hope you won't tear it up childishly again because it's not environmentally friendly." Zhou Chongguang was stunned at first, then he grabbed her sleeve and said angrily, "What are you doing?" Qin Mu watched him grab her arm and said, "Zhou Chongguang, I'm not doing anything. If you care about those women, I can transfer Gumei away. And Lin Shui, I can also give her a sum of money to leave." He thought for a moment before saying this. Qin Mu looked up at him calmly. "Zhou Chongguang, I don't care anymore." He was furious. "Have you ever cared? Why didn't you say it back then? When you couldn't take it anymore, you could divorce me." "Qin Mu, this is the most suitable way for you, huh?" Qin Mu was still expressionless. "If you don't feel comfortable with my divorce, you can sue me. I don't mind." Zhou Chongguang looked at her for a long time before saying, "I didn't know you were so eloquent. It's a pity that you're locked up at home every day. People will grow up eventually. You will wake up from your dreams." "Zhou Chongguang, I've woken up from my dream," she said softly, so softly that she didn't seem to be talking to him, but to herself. Zhou Chongguang closed his eyes. "I won't agree to a divorce. If it's for your reputation, you don't have to. Divorce is very common nowadays." Qin Mu smiled. "Zhou Chongguang, my love has hurt many people. I don't want to lie to myself anymore. Is it because she's back that you've decided to let your brother and her be together?" Zhou Chongguang's voice was a little fierce. "Don't forget that your brother has a girlfriend." Qin Mu's lips curled up slightly. "Even if we get married, we can still get a divorce. Not to mention they're just boyfriend and girlfriend. What about you?" Zhou Chongguang narrowed his eyes at her. "You'll help others and let me off easily?" As he spoke, he could not help but clasp her hand as if she would not be able to escape. Qin Mu shook his head. "There's no such thing as letting go or not. Zhou Chongguang, if I still loved you, I don't think I'd let you off. I'd chase every woman who has slept with you far away. I'd either use money to get rid of them or I'd scratch their faces so that they wouldn't dare to provoke you again." Finally she murmured, "But I don't care anymore. There's no point in doing all this." Zhou Chongguang looked at her. "Let's divorce," Qin Mu said calmly. She wanted to break free from his hand, but Zhou Chongguang did not let go. He pursed his lips and said coldly, "Very well, use 2 or 3 years to heal yourself. Once you've recovered, we'll divorce." Qin Mu did not deny it. "Very well." Zhou Chongguang pursed his lips and let go of her. Qin Mu immediately walked out without a trace of reluctance. Zhou Chongguang looked at her back view and narrowed his eyes. At the door, Zhao Zi happened to bump into Qin Mu. He laughed dryly. "Sister-in-law, are you here to check on me?" Actually, he more or less knew what had happened. The news had spread in the company that Zhou Zong and Lin Shui had been caught red-handed by Mrs. Zhou. Zhao Zi had expected to see Qin Mu in tears, or at least heartache. However, Qin Mu was indifferent just like before. Chapter 21:11. Qin Mu ignored him and took the elevator downstairs. As soon as Zhao Zi pushed the door open, the smell of the man and woman hit him in the face. He was stunned for a moment and then asked, "Is this left by sister-in-law or Lin Shui?" Zhou Chongguang was smoking in front of the French window. He pulled open the blinds and the night view of City B appeared in front of him. Thousands of neon lights couldn't shine into his heart. "Both?" Zhou Chongguang's voice was a little dry and he turned around to look at Zhao Zi. Zhao Zi was stunned. What was going on? That's not right. Given sister-in-law's love for you, why didn't she make a fuss? Don't tell me that you conquered her with your body? Zhao Zi didn't believe it. He was the vice president of Rongguang. He had been with Zhou Chongguang since he took over the company. He had watched Zhou Chongguang grow from a young boy to a rich businessman. To be honest, Chongguang had gone too far in the past few years. He still sympathized with Qin Mu. Zhou Chongguang pinched the cigarette and smiled. She didn't love me for a long time. She didn't come to catch me cheating today but to ask for a divorce. Catching her cheating was just a coincidence, and it made her reason for a divorce more reasonable. Zhao Zi was stunned. The world was changing every day, but he had always believed that Qin Mu's love for Chongguang wouldn't change. Really, he had never seen such pure and passionate love. Qin Mu could be considered to have abandoned everything to follow Chongguang. Although no one had mentioned it in front of her, she had no reason not to suspect Tang Sher's disappearance. Now she said that she didn't love her anymore. It's been 2 or 3 years. She said, she had already found out about me and Gu Mei as well as other women. Zhou Chongguang's expression darkened, leaving a long shadow under the neon lights. Zhao Zi stayed silent for a while before saying, You want a divorce? Zhou Chongguang didn't answer. Zhao Zi sighed softly. Chongguang, if you cared a little about her, you wouldn't have kept Gu Mei by your side. No woman could tolerate her husband sleeping with his secretary for a long time. Even if Zhou Chongguang didn't have that kind of feelings for Gu Mei, he must have slept with her before. Zhou Chongguang's face was facing the outside as he faintly said, she doesn't want anything anymore. She doesn't care anymore. Zhao Zi looked at his silhouette and felt that he seemed a little lonely. He said nothing. After a long time, Zhou Chongguang said calmly, find a detective to monitor her 24/7. I want to see what she's been up to recently. Or did she fall in love with someone else? Zhou Chongguang always felt that only by falling in love with another person would he have the courage to leave his current life. Zhao Zi frowned. If sister-in-law finds out, she might not be happy. She's going to divorce me. Why should I care about whether she's happy or not? Zhou Chongguang snorted coldly. At this time, Zhao Zi felt that Chongguang was very unhappy. Then all these years, although it was a little too much, Zhao Zi still asked, Chongguang, after all these years, have you fallen in love with Qin Mu? There was a reason for him to ask this. Qin Mu was very pretty, comparable to Tang Xueker. Furthermore, she had a quiet personality, which was very attractive to men. All these years, Chongguang had left her at home and she had almost no contact with the outside world. Chapter 21:12. Qin Mu had never been touched by anyone. Did this count as liking her? Zhao Zi wanted to hear it. Zhou Chongguang said calmly, I've never liked her. Then let's get a divorce. Zhao Zi had mixed feelings. Let her go. Zhou Chongguang looked at Zhao Zi and his gaze deepened. I have no intention of changing my wife. Gu Mei is more suitable than her. No matter how you play outside, I think Gu Mei will tolerate it and she will manage the company in good order. Zhao Zi suggested seriously. However, Zhou Chongguang rejected it immediately. A wife is not a subordinate. Chongguang, think about it carefully. Have you ever liked her? If you have, try to make it up to her. Don't hurt her heart. If you haven't, be in peace. Zhao Zi said this with confidence. He had been by Zhou Chongguang's side all these years and thought that he could say a few words about Zhou Chongguang's family affairs and feelings. Zhou Chongguang's gaze was cold. Zi, you seem to care about Qin Mu very much. Zhao Zi's expression didn't change. I just think she is a wife who deserves to be loved, not neglected. Zhou Chongguang's face darkened. A moment later, he said word by word, you like her. It wasn't a question but a statement. Zhao Zi liked Qin Mu, so he had been speaking up for her. After he said that, Zhao Zi didn't deny it. The atmosphere was tense. Then Zhou Chongguang threw a punch and hit Zhao Zi's nose solidly, almost fracturing it. With a bang, Zhao Zi's body fell onto the desk behind him, and he took another hit. He held the edge of the desk and stood up. He wiped his hand, which was full of blood. Zhou Chongguang stood there, his chest heaving. Zhao Zi, she's my wife. He had always treated Zhao Zi as a brother, but now Zhao Zi said that he liked his wife. This was simply, Zhao Zi's face was in a sorry state, but he did not cower. He calmly said, I like her and I've liked her for many years. If you give her up, I will pursue her. Zhou Chongguang sneered and abruptly pulled off his tie. His voice was cold as he said, do you think she will accept you? Zi, in her heart, you and I are in the same nest. Stop dreaming. I'm different from you, Zhao Zi said quietly, I like her and I won't hurt her. Zhou Chongguang was very annoyed. He could feel that Zhao Zi was serious. He took out a cigarette and lit it. After smoking half a cigarette, he said, give up. I won't divorce you. Zhao Zi looked at him and said, Chongguang, she won't like you anymore. Zhou Chongguang's hand that was holding the cigarette trembled. Zhao Zi continued, I think I know why. He smiled faintly. Her taste has never changed. You know Zhao Yan, right? Lin Yun's son, the most popular pianist back then. He was like the white moon. Oh yeah, he opened a restaurant at Second Ring Road. He would occasionally go there to play for an hour or two. Sister-in-law would also go there that day. The cigarette in Zhou Chongguang's hand broke into two. He narrowed his eyes and looked at Zhao Zi. Why didn't you say so earlier? Chapter 21:13. Zhou Chongguang's face was as black as it could get. Zhao Zi's words had indeed provoked him. So, this was the real reason why she wanted a divorce. Give me the address. He looked at Zhao Zi. Forget about your intentions. I won't get a divorce. Zhao Zi wiped his wound and said bitterly, Then don't hurt her anymore. He lowered his head and wrote down the address. Zhao Yan will be at the restaurant tonight. He goes there every Friday. With that, Zhao Zi left to treat his wound and the wound in his heart. He did like Qin Mu, but he couldn't tell Qin Mu. Telling Chongguang was the only way to help her. Zhao Zi smiled desolately. He knew that he would never win Qin Mu's heart. Ever since he started dating Chongguang, he was no longer clean. In the office, Zhou Chongguang held the note tightly in his hand. 8 p.m. A new Western restaurant opened on the second ring road of B City. It was called Starlight in Chinese. It was opened by the youngest musician, Zhao Yan. Business was booming, especially on Friday nights. At 8 p.m. sharp, Yi Muyun's car stopped in the open-air parking lot. When he got out of the car, he instructed Gu Zhe, "Wait here for me for an hour." Gu Zhe nodded. But he sighed in his heart. "Mr. Yi, you're having dinner with your girlfriend. Why did you bring your assistant here?" Moreover, was an hour of lovesickness enough for Miss Song to complain? However, falling in love with Yi Muyun was already very tiring. Mr. Yi was so busy that he didn't have time to accompany his girlfriend. He was so busy that the girl took the initiative on every date. He was so busy that when Song Karen was mentioned, Mr. Yi would be slightly stunned, as though he had said the wrong name. The name in the depths of his memory should not have been completely erased from Yi Zichen's mind. Otherwise, Song Karen would have occupied the seat for a long time. Yi Zichen's age should have long reached the age of marriage, but there was still no movement. Sometimes, Gu Zhe even wondered if Mr. Yi was in love, or was he simply looking for a woman to remind himself that he had forgotten someone and no longer cared about her. Yi Muyun slowly walked into the restaurant. Song Karen had already arrived 10 minutes ago. She had booked a table with a very good view so that she could enjoy the piano performance. When Yi Muyun came in, he accidentally bumped into Qin Mu. The two of them had just met in the afternoon. Now that they saw each other again, they both felt a little strange. "Are you here to eat with Karen?" Qin Mu asked indifferently. Yi Muyun nodded lightly. Then she looked inside. "Alone?" Qin Mu nodded. However, Yi Muyun did not have the intention to introduce his sister to Song Karen. Instead, he chose to stand beside her and talk. "I just found out that it's Zhao Yan's restaurant." Yi Muyun hit the nail on the head. "He plays the piano quite well." Qin Mu naturally heard the hidden meaning in his words. She pursed her lips and said softly, "I thought you didn't like to listen to piano performances." Yi Muyun smiled faintly and changed the topic. "Did you go to see Zhou Chongguang this afternoon?" Qin Mu looked at him with a puzzled expression. "There's a hickey on your neck." Yi Muyun said casually. "Did you change your mind?" Qin Mu was a little embarrassed. She reached out and touched her neck. Then she said the truth, "I saw him with a small celebrity in his company. I was forced." These words were enough to show that she still wanted a divorce. Chapter 21:14. Yi Muyun glanced at Zhao Yan, who had come over, and hesitated for a moment before asking, "Are you still a man who likes to play the piano?" This question was actually a little subtle. Qin Mu shook her head. "No, he plays very well. It's very artistic and enjoyable to listen to. That's all." Yi Muyun patted her shoulder and paused. "Actually, it doesn't matter if you like it. Zhao Yan was a good person, especially Di Feng and Jiue, and his character was also suitable for Qin Mu." Qin Mu still shook her head and suddenly said, "Brother, I want to go abroad." Yi Muyun froze for a moment. "Go out and have a look. I will come back." Qin Mu smiled. "Brother, you should go. Karen is waiting for you." Yi Muyun turned his head and Song Karen was already walking towards him. Obviously, Qin Mu did not want to have any contact with Song Karen, so she reminded him. Yi Muyun thought for a moment and walked over there but stopped Song Karen halfway. "Qin Mu has an appointment." Song Karen wanted to say hello, but seeing that Yi Muyun had already sat down and Qin Mu had also gone to the front seat, she had to give up. She felt a little uneasy. She had been dating him for a long time, but until now they still stopped at the stage of eating, and at most it was just a light kiss. Sometimes she had already closed her eyes, but his kiss suddenly stopped. When she opened her eyes, she saw that his eyes were searching her face, and there was a slight pain in his eyes. Was she the one who made him feel pain? Song Karen slowly realized that he was looking for the shadow of another woman on her face. He had loved someone else, deeply, but she could not argue with him because no one had mentioned it. No one around him dared to mention that person's name. She was also uneasy because he did not take her home to meet his family. She, who was still his girlfriend, and there was no progress when they had known each other for 2 months. "I have already ordered the dishes, and they will be served in a moment." Song Karen's voice was sweet. It can save time. How much time do you have to eat today? Yi Muyun said indifferently, let's do it at 9. Song Karen looked at the time. It was already 8:20. 40 minutes. Excluding the 30 minutes for lunch, she still had 10 minutes left. She couldn't help but feel disappointed, but she still tried to find a topic to talk to him. He looked at Qin Mu and found that she was alone, so he boldly said, Mumu's friend doesn't seem to be here. Why don't we share a table with her? Yi Muyun drank half a glass of aperitif. When he put down the glass, he said indifferently, she's meeting the owner of the restaurant here, and also the person who's playing the song. Song Karen was stunned for a moment, then laughed, I was being nosy. He is very handsome. However, she remembered that Qin Mu was married. It seemed that Mu Yun was very supportive of her coming out in public to look for the person she liked. Song Karen's heart was suppressing her worries, but she didn't dare to say anything. After she finally finished cooking the main meal, she finally found an opportunity. She placed a gilded invitation on the table. There's an art exhibition in my gallery next week. Muyun, can you come? Yi Muyun picked it up casually and said indifferently, I may. After he opened it, he saw the names of several artists engraved inside. The second one was Tang Sher, whose English name was Anen. Chapter 21:15. Qin Mu had told him that she was back, but he hadn't expected her to come back so openly. Did she really think that he wouldn't bother with her after some time and that everything would be over? Song Karen was a little disappointed when she heard those 3 words. He wouldn't be free. However, the words in Yi Muyun's mouth took a turn and became, I might not be too busy. Song Karen's eyes lit up with surprise and excitement. She was so excited that she didn't know what to say. I'll be there on time. He stood up and smiled lightly. I have to keep a low profile. I'll only be attending as a private. Song Karen understood and watched him leave. Just like before, he wouldn't send her home or say some sweet nothings to her, but it was enough now. At least he valued her enough. Song Karen's eyes were red. She felt that Zhao Yan's performance of Dai Liba on the stage was amazing. She even wondered if she could ask Zhao Yan to play this song when she and Mu Yun got married. Would be a dream. Outside the restaurant, Yi Muyun called Guze. I don't need the car. You can drive it back. Guze was stunned. Was it going to rain? Mr. Yi was going to spend the night with Miss Song? Guze didn't leave immediately and sat in the car. After a while, he saw Yi Muyun walk out alone and walk towards a dark place. That dark place lit up with a red light that moved up and down. Mr. Yi was smoking? He wasn't with Song Karen but was smoking alone? Guze narrowed his eyes and his gaze flickered. He saw that Zhou Chongguang was sitting in the car opposite. Zhou Chongguang had one hand outside the car window and a cigarette in his other hand, but his eyes were fixed on the restaurant. He looked like he was catching his wife cheating on him. Guze frowned. Was Qin Mu inside too? On the other side, Zhou Chongguang narrowed his eyes and looked at Qin Mu in the restaurant. What Zhao Zi said was true. He saw Qin Mu holding her chin like a young girl and looking at Zhao Yan who was playing the guqin. Her whole body was like a fan. This was his wife, yet she was looking at another man with such a gaze. He snorted coldly. Just because Zhao Yan could play the zither? He watched as she smiled at Zhao Yan and chatted happily with him. He was almost certain that she had fallen in love with someone else. Sure enough, her taste hadn't changed at all. She liked the Prince of Piano. No wonder she said that he was dirty. In fact, it was not because of him and other women, but because she had found a new target. Compared to Zhao Yan, Zhou Chongguang, was indeed full of the stench of money. After Zhou Chongguang smoked a pack of cigarettes, Qin Mu finally came out. Zhao Yan personally walked her to the door. They smiled and said goodbye. They even hugged. Qin Mu walked to her car. Just as she was about to open the door, a pair of strong arms hugged her from behind. Are the men and women of the dog so open and above board now? Zhou Chongguang's voice was clear. Zhao Yan is a public figure. Aren't you afraid of ruining your own future by hugging a married woman so openly? Qin Mu was shocked at first, but then she realized it was him. She paused for a moment and then said mockingly, Lin Shui seems to be a public figure too. She's just a third-rate celebrity. Zhou Chongguang said indifferently, I never thought about having a future with her. What about you, Mrs. Zhou? You want to marry Zhao Yan? Don't forget that your family and the Tang family are enemies now. Chapter 21:16. Qin Mu paused for a moment and looked down. Zhou Chongguang, I'm not as picky as you. I don't want to take anyone to bed with me. After saying that, she was bitten hard on her neck. He seemed to be venting his anger. Not only did he bite her neck, but he also bit the thin flesh on her ear. Qin couldn't take it anymore and said angrily, Zhou Chongguang, this is a public place. You're shameless, but I'm shameless. Then let's go home and do it. His swallowing movements became slow and seductive. Mumuha. Qin body stiffened. After a while she chuckled. I'm different from you. What's the difference? Can we get used to each other? He kissed her neck. If coaxing her could make her give up on the idea of divorce, then he was willing to bow his head for the time being. The difference between humans and animals. Qin said softly and pushed Zhou Chongguang away. Zhou Chongguang took 2 steps back and stood still. The two of them looked at each other under the neon lights. There were stars in her eyes. It was like her tears. Qin, will you still cry for me? Zhou Chongguang's voice was a little hoarse. He raised his hand and wanted to touch her, but she avoided him. He smiled and said mockingly, now that there's a new person, you've forgotten the old one? Qin, don't forget that I haven't signed the contract yet. You're still my wife, Zhou Chongguang. He always minded that she might have reached that step with Zhao Yan. Qin didn't want to talk to him. She pursed her lips. You can think of it that way. Her gaze fell into the distance. Zhou Chongguang, I can love anyone in this world, but I can't love you. She then opened the door and got into the car. When she closed the door, she swung it so hard that she almost pinched Zhou Chongguang's hand. The car slowly drove away. Zhou Chongguang did not chase after it. He just looked at it calmly, feeling inexplicably irritated. She was serious. She really wanted to divorce him. The relationship between her and Zhao Yan was probably real. Not bad. First, find a spare tire, then bring up the divorce. She had grown up. Zhou Chongguang smoked 2 cigarettes on the spot before getting into his car and speeding away. All of this fell into Gu Zhe's eyes. He sat in the car and it was dark inside. He could see outside, but the people outside couldn't see him. Looking at all this, he could guess that Qin and Zhou Chongguang seemed to have really fallen out. It was not strange at all. If Qin didn't have that illness and happened to meet Zhou Chongguang, she might not have been so hell-bent on him for so many years. Now that he was awake, it was good. The reason why Gu Zhe didn't go out was that it was inconvenient for him to do so. He was Gu Mei's brother, and Gu Mei and Zhou Chongguang had an illicit relationship. If he were to save Qin, what a joke. Zhou Chongguang drove very fast. He arrived at the villa at Qingshui Road almost at the same time as Qin. When he got out of the car, Qin happened to get out as well. She always had a good demeanor. Even after so many things happened today, she still got out of the car slowly, but her expression was a little lazy. When she saw him return, she didn't say anything and just went upstairs. Zhou Chongguang followed slowly with a gloomy face. When they reached the bedroom upstairs, Qin sat on the sofa and rubbed her forehead. She said calmly, your luggage is here. Zhou Chongguang looked over and saw 2 suitcases. Chapter 21:17. Zhou Chongguang raised his eyebrows and glanced around the bedroom. Sure enough, he couldn't find any trace of him living here. She had cleaned it up. Even the wedding photo was gone. There was only a landscape painting hanging in the original place. What about the wedding photo? Did you throw it away too? He asked casually. Qin replied, it's useless to keep it. She opened her eyes slowly and looked at Zhou Chongguang. I'll put the apartment up for sale next week. You're not going to keep anything, are you? Zhou Chongguang sneered. Qin, have all your infatuation disappeared? She didn't say anything but just looked at him sideways. The warm yellow light shone on her face, making her look especially bright and clean. As he looked at her, he couldn't help thinking that she was blessed by the heavens. After so many years, or rather the past 2 or 3 years, she had obviously not been happy, but she still looked the same as before. Qin was the kind of person who had the innocence of a 22-year-old, but she had the charm and calmness of a 30-year-old. If he let her out like this, she would be eaten alive immediately. She must not know how seductive she was. Zhou Chongguang's eyes became a little red just thinking about it. He squinted his eyes and looked at her slightly red cheeks. She had drunk wine. He was sure almost immediately. After a while, he said slowly, I'll find a house as soon as possible and stay in a hotel for the time being. If you change your mind, you can call me or look for me at the company. Qin sighed softly. Zhou Chongguang, if this is what you want to do, you don't have to do it. She looked up and looked straight into his eyes. I won't change my mind. He believed her words. She had never been a pretentious woman. She had always been firm and stubborn. She would stick to one path until there was no other way. Was he the one who made her feel that there was no other way? Zhou Chongguang looked at Qin Mu silently for a long time before he said, I won't agree to divorce. But I must leave you. Qin Mu rubbed her slightly aching forehead. Zhou Chongguang, can you be reasonable? Reason? His expression was extremely ugly. Unbeknownst to her, he had already pulled her into his embrace. Qin Mu was shocked. Then she struggled and said, Zhou Chongguang, are you crazy? What about after the divorce? Are you going to be with that gigolo Zhao Yan? Zhou Chongguang's voice was cold. You can't wait to climb into his bed? Qin Mu couldn't take it anymore and slapped him. Enough. After a crisp sound, the world became quiet. This was the first time they had hit each other before and after marriage, and she was the one who hit him. Zhou Chongguang's face was completely dark. He narrowed his eyes and said, Qin Mu, give up on the divorce. As he said that, he pulled forcefully. Qin Mu shrieked. And he ignored her struggle and forced himself on her for the second time today. Qin Mu struggled and screamed, but she couldn't stop him. The 28-year-old Zhou Chongguang was no longer the teenager he used to be. He was a well-built man with a six-pack. He dominated her fiercely. When she didn't listen, he grabbed her hand, raised it high, and pinned her firmly. She didn't respond, so he used all kinds of despicable ways to force her to scream. Chapter 21:18. Perhaps it was because the commotion was too loud. The servants knocked on the door and asked worriedly, Sir, madam? Get lost. Zhou Chongguang's voice was full of anger and desire, followed by a string of ambiguous sounds. The servants blushed and did not know what to do. In the bedroom, Zhou Chongguang looked down at her from above and pinched her chin with one hand. Am I more able to satisfy you or him? Qin Mu shook her head and could not say a word. She was bullied to the point that she was in tears. That pathetic and pitiful look could arouse a man's desire to conquer her. Tell me, am I better or is he better? His eyes were bloodshot as he forced himself on her while saying shameless words. After their marriage, he had always been cold and restrained in bed, and he had never used any of his tricks on her. Tonight he was stimulated and used all of them. The more she did not say anything, the more he wanted to force her to break down. In the end, a man's deep-rooted bad habits won out. He was probably too angry and actually did something that crossed the line. Qin Mu's eyes widened and she looked at him in disbelief. Since he had already done it, he had no reason not to enjoy it to the end, so he narrowed his eyes. When he was done, Qin Mu could not help but rush to the bathroom and vomit on the toilet bowl. She only fell to the side after she had vomited almost all her bile. Zhou Chongguang stood quietly at the door of the bathroom, like an evil god. He went forward, grabbed Qin Mu and kissed her lips. He carried her to the shower, but he still didn't let her go. Tonight he seemed to have gone crazy. Qin Mu was in a daze. When she woke up he was still doing it. When she fainted he was still doing it. It was not until dawn that he completely let her go. The two of them lay flat on the bed. The air was filled with the scent of intimacy between a man and a woman. Although they were so close, their hearts were so far apart. Qin Mu closed her eyes and said weakly, Zhou Chongguang, it's useless. Do you dare to say that you're uncomfortable, that you didn't enjoy it? He opened his sharp eyes and pinched her chin. I can move out for a while, but that doesn't mean I'm willing to give up on marriage. Qin Mu will talk after you've thought it through. As he spoke, he rose to his feet, his movements elegant. Qin Mu didn't move until he put on his clothes. Only then did she squeeze out a word from her throat, get lost. Zhou Chongguang's expression was ugly, but he endured it in the end. By the time he left, the sky was already bright. A man naturally needed to rest after a night of indulgence, but he knew that with him here, she wouldn't be able to rest well. As he said, he was willing to give her time. However, most of the reason was because of his roughness last night. He had never been so rough with a woman, not even the women he paid to beat. Qin Mu had always been soft and tender. She must have been injured last night. Zhou Chongguang turned his car around again. He went to a pharmacy to buy medicine and returned to the house in Qingshui Road. When he walked through the hall, the servants looked at him with a complicated expression. Zhou Chongguang went upstairs, but he didn't see Qin Mu. He came down again and caught a maid. Where's madam? Chapter 21:19. Zhou Chongguang furrowed his brows. Which hospital? The servant shook his head. I don't know, but you can call old Zhao. Zhou Chongguang's face darkened. He didn't have old Zhao's number or the contact information of the people around her. Usually she would stay at home and nothing would happen. She would only ask him if he was coming home for dinner. There had never been a situation where he couldn't find her when he came home, so he didn't need to know. At the same time, Zhou Chongguang remembered that she hadn't called him in the past 2 or 3 years. She didn't care if he came home or if he had eaten. The more he thought about it, the more anxious he felt. He got into the car and lit a cigarette. Then he called Zhao Zi. Check old Zhao's number. What's wrong? Zhao Zi frowned. For some reason, Zhou Chongguang was especially willing to tell Zhao Zi that he had injured Qin Mu. He probably wanted him to give up. I didn't control it well last night. Qin Mu was injured. Old Zhao sent her to the hospital. Zhou Chongguang took a drag and blew out smoke rings. His gaze was unfathomable in the smoke. Zhao Zi's voice was a little tense. What happened to her? Zi, she is still my wife. Zhou Chongguang lowered his voice. Zhao Zi's voice was also a little cold. She asked for a divorce. But I exercised my rights as a husband last night. Zhou Chongguang's voice was very low. Zi, you'd better give up on that idea. I won't let her go. On the other side, Zhao Zi said mockingly after a while, then I'll have to trouble Zhou Zong to find the number yourself. From today onwards, I'm taking a month off. With that, he hung up. Zhou Chongguang wanted to smash his phone. He was extremely depressed. His woman wanted a divorce and his brother was betraying him. In the end, he still called Gu Mei. Gu Mei quickly gave him old Zhao's number. However, Gu Mei still asked softly, do you start to care about her? Zhou Chongguang sneered, Gu Mei, she is my wife. Shouldn't I care about her? Gu Mei chuckled. But when have you ever treated her as your wife? With that, she hung up the phone. Zhou Chongguang narrowed his eyes. This time he really smashed his phone. When he arrived at Xingyuan Hospital, she had already entered the VIP ward. Lao Zhao scratched his head at the door. It's nothing serious. It's just a little torn. Zhou Chongguang's expression was a little ugly. Old Zhao's gaze was subtle. Then I'll go back to get some things. Mr. Zhou, please take care of him here. Zhou Chongguang nodded. Bring someone to take care of her. Old Zhao understood. It was more convenient to have a woman to take care of him. However, he had lived in this small home for several years, and this was the first time the young couple had been like this. He didn't expect that they would be sent to the hospital so quickly. This was a matter between husband and wife. How could he be so rough? After all, old Zhao was just a driver and a rough man. It wasn't appropriate for him to say these words out loud, so he kept it to himself. After old Zhao left, Zhou Chongguang walked into the ward. Qin Mu had probably fallen asleep because she was too tired. He walked over and looked at her quietly. Her little face was a little pale as it rested on the pillow. Her long black hair covered half of her face, and she was also wrapped around the snow-white pillow. Chapter 21:20. Zhou Chongguang resisted the urge and reached out his hand to touch her forehead. It was very hot. At this time the nurse came in and looked at Zhou Chongguang. She asked impatiently, "Are you a family member of the patient?" Actually, they all knew each other. Who didn't know Mr. Ye's sister and brother-in-law? Zhou Chongguang nodded. The nurse sneered, "You're ruthless. Don't tell me this is sexual pleasure. This is domestic violence, rape." Zhou Chongguang was about to lose his temper when the nurse restrained her voice. "Do you know what kind of harm your behavior will cause to women? Minor injuries and serious ones can even lead to lifelong infertility." Infertility? Zhou Chongguang was about to lose his temper, but he suddenly calmed down. "If you don't cherish a wife like Miss Qin, you'll regret it if you lose her." The nurse lectured, "How good are the women outside?" Zhou Chongguang's eyebrows twitched. The nurse's words revealed a piece of information. Everyone in City B probably knew about Zhou Chongguang's dissolute deeds. There are many rich men who play with women, but none of them are as young and beautiful as his wife. The nurse's voice was a little sad. "If you don't love her, let her go." After that he finished his work. He glanced at Zhou Chongguang, signed his name and left. Zhou Chongguang's eyes fell on Qin Mu, who was lying on the bed. His gaze was a little complicated. "Did you also know about me from them?" Except for that time in the office, had she ever seen him outside, with other women? Suddenly, Zhou Chongguang felt that it was reasonable that she didn't love him anymore. Yes, what was there for her to miss about a man who fooled around outside? Zhou Chongguang smiled bitterly. Since when did he become too lazy to deal with her? That's why he didn't care about what she knew. Was he sure that she wouldn't make a fuss after knowing, or did he want her to make a fuss? In the end, she didn't cry or make a fuss. She put up with him for 2 or 3 years, and then told him that she didn't love him anymore. In the end, it seemed that he was the one who suffered. Even now, there was a trace of guilt in his heart, but he still couldn't let go of her. He thought that he might be able to restrain himself for her. If she didn't like Gu Mei's existence, he would transfer Gu Mei to the overseas branch company. If she didn't like Lin Shui, he would dump Lin Shui. Anyway, there was still Zhao Shui and Li Shui, so he didn't really care. What he needed to do now was not to take back her heart, to make her fall in love with him again. Then, as before, she waited for him at home. He should come home often. Once a week with her could be changed to 3 times a week. This frequency was enough for a woman. He could take his time with her in all of this. The gentleness in Zhou Chongguang's eyes was quietly replaced by scheming. But this time he had miscalculated. He had lost her and he had lost himself. When Qin Mu woke up, Zhou Chongguang was still in the ward. Seeing her wake up, he smiled and said, "Are you feeling better?" Qin Mu looked at him and didn't say a word. She turned her face to the other side. He knew that she was angry because of his rudeness last night, so he said in a low voice, "Tell me next time it hurts." "There won't be a next time." Qin Mu's voice sounded strange. "If there's a next time, I will sue you for marital rape. You don't care, but your company can't have such a scandal." Chapter 21-21. Zhou Chongguang didn't say anything else. He stayed by her side and watched her close her eyes in pain. After a while he still didn't collapse. He said softly, "Is it very painful?" Qin Mu opened her eyes and looked at him expressionlessly. "Why didn't you ask me if it was painful when you were having fun?" Zhou Chongguang was stunned for a moment and sighed. "Have a good rest." Qin Mu closed her eyes and ignored him. When old Zhao came over, Zhou Chongguang hadn't left yet. Old Zhao was stunned for a moment and said softly, "Sir, why don't you go back to the hotel to rest first?" Zhou Chongguang looked at old Zhao and old Zhao said in shock, "Well, I brought your luggage here for you, Mr. Zhou." Zhou Chongguang sneered. "You're really loyal." Old Zhao was silent for a while and said slowly, "Miss hasn't been happy in the past few years. Is she happy now?" Zhou Chongguang's voice was a little absent-minded. Did Zhao Yan bring her happiness? Old Zhao couldn't say it. He just said frankly, "There's no love, and it's meaningless to be tied together. Fortunately, there are no children." Zhou Chongguang's gaze fell on Qin Mu's lower abdomen. After a while, he said in a low voice, "Maybe she's already pregnant." At this moment he was actually looking forward to the birth of a child. At least he would give up on her thoughts of divorce. He knew Qin Mu. If she had a child, she would probably give up and accept her fate. Moreover, if she had a child, she wouldn't be so bored. Her heart would be at home and she wouldn't worry about gains and losses. That was the current situation. Zhou Chongguang was trying to keep this marriage, but he still kept it. It was just a habit for him to treat Qin Mu. He said in a low voice, "If she has a child, she won't abandon him." Old Zhao didn't know what to say for a moment. "You guys go back first and come over in the afternoon." Zhou Chongguang's voice was slightly deep. He had a meeting in the afternoon, so he could accompany her in the morning. Old Zhao froze for a moment, but in the end he gave in. No matter what, Zhou Chongguang was still the Mrs. Legal husband, so he had to respect him. Lao Zhao left first and brought Zhou Chongguang's luggage with him. Zhou Chongguang had originally planned to move away, but now he changed his mind. At least for the time being he didn't want to leave. He hadn't slept all night, so he leaned against the side of the bed. Just a little bit he heard her weak voice, "Don't. Let me go. Zhou Chongguang. I don't love you anymore, I want to divorce you." He opened his tired eyes and listened to her say such heartless words. He found that his heart was a little numb. He wiped the sweat off her forehead with a towel. After a long time he said in a low voice, "You don't love me anymore because of that woman outside? If I cut off all the women outside, will you change your mind?" She was still asleep and could not answer him. Zhou Chongguang kept watch until noon, but she still didn't wake up, or she didn't want to see him when she woke up. Zhou Chongguang whispered in her ear, "Mumu, I'll go to the company first. We'll talk about it tonight." She only needed to be on the drip for 2 days. The doctor said that she could go back at night. Qin Mu ignored him and continued to pretend to be asleep. Zhou Chongguang felt a little helpless, so he went back first. After he left, Qin Mu turned around and looked at the closed door. She lay there thinking about what had happened in the past 2 days. Chapter 21-22. But it didn't mean anything. It didn't mean that he had feelings for her. If he had feelings for her, he wouldn't have had so many women outside. Qinmu closed her eyes and felt much better. She asked the servants who came to take care of her to prepare some food. She had brought Asyang from the Qin family. She asked worriedly, "Should we tell madam?" Qinmu was stunned for a moment and said, "Don't tell her. My mother will worry about it again." Her mother and brother had always had a knot in their hearts because of her. Although they didn't say it, the crack was deep inside. How could she not know? Asyang nodded. Qinmu propped herself up and looked at Asyang. "Where's Uncle Zhao? Let him in." Asyang was stunned for a moment and immediately went to call him. After a while, Lao Zhao came in and saw Qinmu lying weakly on the hospital bed. His heart felt stifled. Zhou Chongguang had gone too far. Qinmu's voice was gentle. Did Zhou Chongguang not take his things with him? Lao Zhao hesitated for a moment and nodded. Qinmu thought for a moment. Then book a hotel for me. I won't be going back. If he wanted to stay there, let him stay there. Lao Zhao was stunned. Miss, how can you do that? Asyang can stay with me. Zhou Chongguang will move out in 2 days. Qinmu said calmly and confidently. Although Zhou Chongguang didn't love her, she had some understanding of his character. He was also a little arrogant. Lao Zhao understood. He asked Asyang to go back and pack her things while he stood guard outside. When Qinmu came out, she still walked a little unnaturally. Lao Zhao wanted to help her but she refused. Uncle Zhao, let me walk by myself. In the future she would go abroad alone. She would go to many places alone. There was no one she could rely on. Lao Zhao put down his hand and walked in front of Qinmu, guarding the elevator. The elevator only came up after about 2 minutes. Qinmu was stunned when she saw the person who came out. That was Gu Zhe, Gu Mei's brother, and also someone close to her brother. He used to be a special assistant and now he was equivalent to her brother's position. He was the vice president of Boyi, which was a high position. As for Gu Zhe, Qinmu didn't want to stay too much because he was Gu Mei's brother. Qinmu's little face tensed up and he didn't make a sound. He waited for the people in the lift to come out before he wanted to enter. But Gu Zhe stopped her. Qinmu. Qinmu's body froze. He turned back to look at Gu Zhe and asked coldly, "Mr. Gu, is there anything?" Gu Zhe pursed his lips. "The director here called Boss Yi and said that you came over to get some drip. Boss Yi asked me to come and take a look. Go back and tell my brother that I'm fine." Qinmu didn't give him a good look. Is it because of Zhou Chongguang? Qinmu's face darkened. She sneered. "I think it'll be faster if you ask Gu Mei." She didn't want to talk to him, but Gu Zhe grabbed her arm. "I just want to ask you." She didn't want to talk to him, but Gu Zhe grabbed her arm. "I just want to ask you." Qinmu was a little embarrassed. She looked at Lao Zhao and said, "Uncle Zhao, chase this person away." Lao Zhao waved his hand. "Miss, I'm an old man. I'm no match for Mr. Gu." Qinmu stomped her feet in anger, but this stomp caused her to feel pain in her legs. She frowned in pain. Gu Zhe was a man. He saw what happened last night. It was very likely that Zhou Chongguang had hit her. Chapter 21-23. Gu Zhe, what are you doing? Why are you carrying me? Qinmu's voice was reserved. After all, strictly speaking, she was the master and he was the servant. Gu Zhe ignored her struggle and carried her directly to the elevator, locking Lao Zhao outside. Lao Zhao was not only not annoyed, he was even happy. Mr. Gu looked so manly and his gaze clearly showed that he was interested in Mississippi. But there was one thing that was difficult, and that was that Mr. Gu's sister was Zhou Chongguang's mistress. In the elevator there were only Gu Zhe and Qinmu. Now that he had calmed down, Gu Zhe regretted, he had crossed the line. But he had already crossed the line and he had no reason to let her go. Hugging her, he looked at her angry face in the mirror and asked softly, "Did he hit you?" "Yes, are you happy now?" Qinmu sneered, "Gu Zhe, you should be happy. Your sister is one step closer to being Mrs. Zhou." Gu Zhe frowned, "I've never thought of it that way." "What about Gu Mei? Has she thought about it?" Qinmu sneered, "Gu Zhe, I don't love Zhou Chongguang anymore. I'm going to divorce him, but it doesn't mean that I can live in peace with the Gu family and even accept your so-called kindness." Gu Zhe looked at her but did not say a word. Now there were only 2 sentences left in his world. She didn't love Zhou Chongguang anymore. She was going to divorce Zhou Chongguang. He did not know why he was so happy. Anyway, his world was filled with pink bubbles called Qinmu. But it was only for a moment. Because he was Gu Zhe, Qinmu's brother, she could be with anyone but him in this lifetime. Gu Zhe smiled bitterly. "Where are you going?" Let me send you? Qinmu was silent for a while. Mr. Gu, just leave me in the hall. I really can't accept your kindness. She looked up, but her eyes met his deep and clear ones. Guze was 30 years old, 2 years older than Yimuyun. He was a very reserved man, and his appearance here today was not only because of his brother's order. Qinmu was already 22 years old. She knew everything that she should know. She was not any less sensitive as a woman. For a moment the atmosphere was a little strange. The elevator door opened but nobody noticed it. At that moment, Guze knew that she had found out. He had discovered his hidden thoughts. However, in front of a little girl, a seasoned man like him would not lose face. He coughed lightly. We're here. He walked out. Because of his guilty conscience he quickly put her down. However, he did not abandon her directly. Instead he waited for old Zhao to come over. I'll take my leave first. Guze smiled faintly, smiling somewhat helplessly. Qinmu stopped him. Guze turned his head and looked at her. Mr. Gu, I'll be going abroad. Qinmu said lightly. Guze understood. He looked at her deeply for a long time before saying softly, Thank you for telling me. This was Qinmu's kindness. She was telling him that it was impossible for them to be together, and asking him not to wait. Actually, she had always been smart and kind. All these years she had suffered, she had felt guilty. She did not even blame Zhou Chongguang as long as they broke up peacefully. As for Gu Mei, she had never really hurt her. Guze was a little sad. Such a girl should be cherished. But if she wanted to fly, then he would watch her fly, and not break her wings. Chapter 21-24. Old Zhao stared blankly for a long time before he complained, Mr. Gu is such a good man, unlike Zhou Chongguang, who is so cunning. He's so successful without any scandals. Qinmu looked at the door and then at old Zhao. Uncle Zhao, your expectations of men are too low. Isn't it normal not to have scandals? Can a man be called a good man if he doesn't indulge in debauchery? Old Zhao said sulkily, but I can see that Mr. Gu likes Mississippi. Qinmu didn't say anything. Old Zhao sighed again. It's a pity that he is Gu Mei's brother. This relationship was too complicated. Forget it. Old Zhao drove Qinmu to Wenhua Hotel and booked a high-class suite. Xiang followed them. When old Zhao left, a black Audi looked in the direction of old Zhao's departure and then looked up at the hotel. The person sitting in the car was Guze. His fingertips were burning and he was smoking absent-mindedly. Actually, she had made it quite clear, but he still didn't give up and followed her. Just like how he had been following her for the past few years, it had become a habit. He had seen her cry, laugh, and look at her extremely satisfied look. She was quite good now, so good that he didn't dare to disturb her. There was also a time when he was happy because her relationship with Zhou Chongguang was breaking up. That kind of joy was also dark and unknown. Guze smoked lightly, thinking that he was not an ordinary person after all. In his heart there was also greed. He knew that it was impossible, but it wasn't that he didn't desire it. Just like just now, it was just that he was ruthlessly rejected. Guze smoked, then started the car and left slowly. There was a kind of protection that she didn't need to know. That night, when Zhou Chongguang returned to the house in Qingshui Road, Qinmu wasn't there. The servants at home said timidly that Miss didn't come back. Zhou Chongguang didn't make things difficult for them. He just walked upstairs to the bedroom and looked at the empty room. This used to be his home. It was his and Qinmu's home. In the beginning he came back every day. Later on he didn't come back often. On those nights when he was drunk, he was often accompanied by different perfumes. He didn't think much of it. He found a trace of comfort in these similar faces. However, he would definitely go back once a week because he didn't want his wife to have an affair because of physical reasons. He would give it to her once a week, thinking it was enough for her age. He was used to seeing things, but she was as clean as a young girl. Slowly he began to feel bored. She was too dense. He started to cope, just to vent. But when he touched her beautiful body he would occasionally go crazy. Finally he got tired of it. Zhou Chongguang lay there. He knew that she did not come back because he refused to leave. He smiled. Could he still stay here and not leave? Therefore he took out his phone and dialed Qinmu's number. It was only 8 o'clock. She probably wasn't asleep yet. When the call went through, Zhou Chongguang's voice was very soft. Where are you? Qinmu was also lying on the bed. Her voice was calm. I'm at the hotel. After that, Zhou Chongguang was silent for a long time before saying, Move back tomorrow. I'm leaving. Qinmu said okay and hung up the phone. Zhou Chongguang looked at the phone with a gloomy expression. Chapter 21-25. He lay on the bed and couldn't fall asleep again. The moment he closed his eyes, he saw the 14-year-old Qin Mu sitting in the dining room, watching him play the piano. Qin Mu, such a deep love, how could she just throw it away like that? He had used some tricks. He came back the same night Qin Mu came back. He told her that he had come to get something, but he didn't take it with him when he left early in the morning. She didn't say anything but just opened the bedroom door for him to take it. She stood at the door with a defensive look. Zhou Chongguang only took a leather suitcase. I've tidied it up again. Those are not very useful. You can throw them away if you want. Qin Mu nodded. It seemed that there was no reason to stay. Zhou Chongguang put down the suitcase and looked at her. Can I hug you again? You can say goodbye 10 times after you sign it. She leaned against the door looking very cold. Zhou Chongguang suddenly laughed, walked in front of her, and gently pinched her soft little face. You seem to have a personality now. Qin Mu ignored him and turned her face away. He didn't care, just smiled, picked up the suitcase and left. When he left, no one in the house said anything. Zhou Chongguang laughed at himself. In their hearts, he wasn't a good husband. 2 days after he left, Qin Mu tidied up the things in the house and put them up for sale. She started to apply for the visa while looking for a buyer. At the headquarters of Glory Entertainment, Zhou Chongguang sat behind the desk, frowning and looking at Gu Mei. Get someone to buy that house. Also, put some effort into Qin Mu's visa. Don't let her get it done so quickly. She was going abroad. She couldn't wait to fly away from him. Zhou Chongguang took a drag of his cigarette. After these 2 things are done, Gu Mei, pack up and go to the New York branch. Gu Mei was stunned. Chongguang, does this represent your choice? Banish her and return to her family? Zhou Chongguang narrowed his eyes and said calmly, Gu Mei, you're a smart person. You're by my side because you spent 3 years in prison for me. Don't you know how I feel about you? Gu Mei's lips trembled slightly. What about Qin Mu? Are you in love with her? No. Zhou Chongguang said firmly, but I don't want to divorce her. If he had to sacrifice Gu Mei to maintain his marriage, he would not hesitate. Gu Mei closed her eyes. Why not banish them completely? Zhou Chongguang, that's because you. She opened her eyes and there was a hint of mockery in them. Because you don't want to change for her. I'm curious, how long does Zhou Zong have to be a good husband? Zhou Chongguang's voice was cold and ruthless. 1 year, maybe 2 years until she gives birth. Gu Mei's face turned pale. She murmured, you really don't have a heart. She looked at him and asked softly, Zhou Chongguang, aren't you afraid that you'll really fall in love with her one day and she'll never turn back? Her intuition told her that as long as Zhou Chongguang used a little trick, Qin Mu would return to him. But what would she do when she found out the truth? Qin Mu won't be able to take it? Have you forgotten her illness? Gu Mei asked in disbelief. Zhou Chongguang's lips curled up slightly. All these years she knows a lot of things. Gu Mei, she's not the little girl she used to be. There was a strange look in Zhou Chongguang's eyes. Chapter 21-26. Although his wife was Qin Mu, he was used to that family. When Qin Mu said she wanted to leave, she was like his enemy. Gu Mei's whole body was cold. Zhou Chongguang only showed his true colors in front of her. But she had an unspeakable heartache. He let her know again and again that she liked a devil, not a ray of sunshine. Because of Zhou Chongguang, the house was sold quickly, but Qin Mu couldn't get a visa to go to the United States. She didn't want to live in the Qin mansion, so she moved into a hotel, and all the servants went back to the Qin mansion. Yi Liangqiu had summoned her once. He neither supported nor objected to her request for a divorce. She probably guessed that this day would come sooner or later. Qin Mu didn't go to work, so she had nothing to do in the hotel. That night she went downstairs. Looking at the starry sky, she suddenly thought of the restaurant she used to go to. She wanted to go there again before she left. It had been 8 years and she didn't know if the restaurant was still there. Qin Mu walked over slowly. She was surprised to find that the restaurant was still there, and it was the same as before. Even the customers were familiar to her. It seemed that there were still the same people coming and going. She stood there with tears in her eyes. It was as if she saw the 14-year-old Qin Mu sitting there, struggling to maintain her love. But today the things she insisted on were gone with the wind. Nothing was left. She cried. The tears fell slowly as if corroding her heart. The piano sounded slowly and it was a familiar tune. her body trembled and she looked in that direction. It was Zhou Chongguang. He was wearing a gray sweater, sitting there playing the piano, and he didn't look like a teenager anymore. The sound of the piano was rusty compared to before. But he was still sitting there, overlapping with the ray of sunshine in her memory. Qin Mu's heart felt as though it had been struck by a heavy blow. She stood there motionlessly with an indescribable sadness in her heart. She did not know how many tears she had shed. She had forgotten how many people were watching her. She sat in her previous seat as if possessed, holding her chin and looking at him with fascination like a little girl. At this moment she was like a nightmare, unable to resist. It was as if she had fallen into time and returned to the past. So did he. Mumu, don't cry. A gentle voice sounded in his ear. Qin Mu raised her head and looked at the person in front of her. Was he the current Zhou Chongguang or was he the old Zhou Chongguang? She couldn't tell. I'm sorry, Mumu. I'm back. He hugged her gently and said in a bewitching voice, don't cry. Qin Mu's tears fell like rain. She couldn't walk out of it. She regretted coming here. She didn't know where she got the strength from, but she pushed him away violently. She stared at him and said, Zhou Chongguang, we're getting a divorce. She almost screamed out loud with unwillingness and indignation. She used to love him so much. It turned out that at this moment she realized that she was just deceiving herself. Zhou Chongguang frowned and walked toward her step by step. Mumu, it's my fault. Can you go home? He coaxed her as if she was a 14-year-old girl. He hugged her forcefully, not allowing her to struggle. He whispered in her ear, I've banished Gu Mei to the United States, and I've also chased away those messy women. Mumu, can we go home? Chapter 21-27. Qin Mu looked up at him and kept looking at him. The tear in her eyes became a scar that Zhou Chongguang could not erase. She suddenly took a step back and shook her head. You're not him. That teardrop slowly fell. Perhaps you were never him. Qin Mu took a step back. Zhou Chongguang, let's end it here. After saying that, she turned around and left. Zhou Chongguang stood behind her and asked softly, Mumu, what do I have to do to make you come back? Qin Mu paused for a moment. She didn't turn around and left quickly. She cried. Even now she would still be sad, and she would still be sad because of him. She would still occasionally fantasize that he really loved her. But all of this was just a dream. Qin Mu walked faster and faster until she bumped into a sturdy body at the door. The smell was familiar. She looked up and saw Guzei. Qin Mu looked at the man in front of her in surprise. Hearing the footsteps behind her, she couldn't care less and begged him, take me away. Guzei looked behind him and seemed to have guessed something. He looked at her deeply and suddenly turned his body to the side, hugging her in his arms. He was very tall and covered her in front of him, completely blocking her. Her little head was pressed on his shoulder, and she was very, very close to him. She was so close that she could smell the faint smell of tobacco on his body. Unlike Zhou Chongguang had always smelled like a woman's perfume in the past few years. Guzei's body smelled like a man's. Qin Mu closed her eyes and tears fell. She had been hurt in the past few years. After all, she had really loved that person. Guzei held Qin Mu and walked quickly to the parking lot. The lights made his dark figure very long. On such a lonely night, for the first time, someone accompanied him. Walking to the side of a Land Rover, he opened the door for her to get in and walked around to sit down. Guzei looked at her tilted head and asked softly, Are you okay? Qin Mu turned her head, and there was still a trace of brightness in the corner of her eyes. Guzei sighed. He suddenly reached out his hand and gently wiped away the tear. Don't be sad anymore. Qin Mu pursed her lips. Why are you so good to me? He held the steering wheel with both hands, looked at the dark night ahead and smiled. Qin Mu, don't you know? After that, there was a period of silence. She didn't speak again. He turned his head and asked gently, Where do you live? Qin Mu looked at him and pursed her lips. You don't know? Guzei smiled. He knew about her naughtiness, her quick-wittedness, and her cuteness, but Zhou Chongguang had always turned a blind eye to it. He started the car and drove slowly to Wenhua Hotel. They arrived in a few minutes. He sat there and watched as Qin Mu unfastened her seatbelt and got ready to get out of the car. He suddenly put his hand in front of her waist and trapped her. His voice was a little hoarse. Qin Mu. She looked up at him. Guzei paused for a long time before he said slowly, If there's anything, you can look for me. He took out a business card from the central control and put it in her palm. He had never courted a girl before and she was now someone else's wife. Adding Gu Mei to the mix, it was already too much for him to do this. But he couldn't control himself. Qin Mu looked down at the business card for a long time and clenched it. Guze, you should know. Chapter 21-28. He only wanted her to be happy. He knew that she didn't like him appearing in front of her, so he wouldn't cause her any trouble. Just take it as me making it up to Gu Mei. He smiled bitterly and suddenly reached out to rub her long hair. Qin Mu, don't think about others. Think about yourself. Qin Mu lowered her head and didn't say anything. She just gripped the business card tightly and got out of the car. She had no feelings for Guze and didn't like Gu Mei. But liking someone was not a sin. Therefore she would not embarrass him nor would she hurt him. Guze looked at the direction in which she left. He put his hands on the steering wheel and leaned back slightly. His fingers fell on his eyes and he felt a prickling pain. He knew that she was going to America. By then he wouldn't even have the chance to protect her like this. Guze looked at her in a daze. He was still in a daze until the next day when he had a meeting at Boyi. Yimuyun asked him to stay alone. I heard that you saw Qin Mu last night? Yimuyun said quietly. Guze didn't say anything. He just lit a cigarette and smoked quietly. If it wasn't for Gu Mei, I would rather you be the one by Qin Mu's side. Yimuyun said calmly and then said, Guze, if I give you another choice now, one is to be with Qin Mu, and the other is to be promoted to the CEO of Boyi, which one would you choose? Guze looked at Yimuyun. His lips moved but he didn't say anything in the end. Think about your answer carefully and you will know what to do. Yimuyun smiled and got up to walk outside. Outside, Zheng Sini was waiting. When she saw Yimuyun come out, she reminded him softly, Mr. Yi, Miss Song just called and said that there will be an art exhibition tomorrow. Please don't forget. The button that Yimuyun was about to undo was buttoned up again. Frowning slightly, he glanced at Zheng Sini and said quietly, got it? If she calls again, tell her I'll be going tomorrow. Zheng Sini hesitated for a moment before asking, Mr. Yi, won't you pick up Miss Song? Tomorrow is very important for Miss Song. Yimuyun's gaze was indifferent. Zheng Sini's heart skipped a beat. She lowered her head. I'm sorry, Mr. Yi. I've crossed the line. Just this once. Yimuyun walked past her, his voice even fainter. Zheng Sini lowered her gaze and followed him. He pushed open Yimuyun's office door and was just about to say something when he was reprimanded, Get out. She was a little embarrassed but she still retreated meekly. Her eyes were filled with mockery. Song Karen was never a big deal to Mr. Yi. Even her appearance was very deliberate. Because that person didn't come back, Mr. Yi found a girlfriend so that that person would think that everything was over. That person indeed came back. Song Karen was destined to be abandoned before she even got on the stage. Zheng Sini chuckled softly. This day had finally arrived. Inside the office, Yimuyun stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, looking at the scenery of B City. He stood at the highest point, and everything he wanted was within his reach except for her. She came back, a trace of pain appeared on his handsome face. Cher, what do you look like now? Do you still remember me? Yimuyun pursed his lips, looking at the sunset and the tide. Just like that he stood alone for 8 years. But she didn't know anything and just left. Chapter 21-29. The famous Silver Gallery in B City was exhibiting the works of some cutting-edge artists today. Almost all the people in the entertainment industry came to support, and there were also young artists invited by Song Karen to help. The exhibition hall was more than 2,000 square meters, and it was opened in the bustling area of B City, where every inch of land was worth gold. Some people said that it was all because of Yimuyun that Song Karen could get such a location. However, Yimuyun had never expressed his relationship with Song Karen. The reporters only photographed them together at most, and there was not a single intimate action. Song Karen was wearing a white Xiongnu skirt, and her hair was slightly curled. Her makeup was bright, and she looked a little like the famous model Miranda Keir. She smiled and answered the reporters' questions, and she was in a very good mood. Today the works exhibited in her gallery were very popular, especially Ann's works. Famous people in the art industry all said that they were very profound and shocking. In fact, there was a painting called Rain Curtain that Song Karen also liked very much. On a rainy night, a young girl stood. She looked up at the sky and in the distance, stood a young man holding an umbrella, walking towards her. The mood was very beautiful. Song Karen didn't want to sell this painting. She wanted to buy it herself and give it to Yi Muyun. She thought that he would like Ann's works. She held a glass of wine and answered the reporter's questions from time to time, while looking out the door. At about 10 o'clock Yi Muyun came over. He came alone without any entourage, but he still caused a sensation. His appearance also confirmed the scandal between him and Song Karen. Song Karen looked at him and felt a burst of excitement in her heart, but she tried her best to resist going forward to greet him. When she stood with him and was photographed by the reporters, she really wanted to hold his arm. However, she didn't dare to. Yi Muyun had always been indifferent. He didn't deny or admit his relationship with Song Karen. After the photo shoot, Yi Muyun went to see the exhibition. Then, everyone realized that Song Karen's mind was not on the interview, but on Mr. Yi. However, no one dared to expose her, so the interview became useless. Until Ann appeared. Ann was the most promising artist this time. Her paintings were very heavy. When she appeared, the spotlights were flashing non-stop. However, the reporters were shocked to discover that Ann was Boyi's daughter, Tang Sher, who had been missing for 8 years. And now Mr. Yi was also here. Was it a coincidence? After 8 years of separation, Mr. Yi had a beautiful woman by his side. The drama of the era was nothing more than this. The reporters were all waiting excitedly to capture the classic reunion scene that they wanted to capture the most. But almost immediately, they received insider information that they were only allowed to write about Ann's paintings in today's press release. They were not allowed to reveal her identity and emotional life. It didn't take much to figure out who incited this. Who had the ability to make the media collectively lose their voice. When Cher walked into the exhibition hall, she didn't know why, but the venue had been cleared. Only Yi Muyun stood quietly in front of her curtain of rain. Listening to the footsteps, he gently turned around. His gaze was especially calm as he looked at her. She also stood there looking at him. There was a hint of shock in her eyes. "Do you still remember me?" Yi Muyun's voice was very soft, his gaze never leaving her little face. It had grown up. The baby look from before had completely faded. Her little chin was very sharp, small and delicate, and she looked even more beautiful. She was 26 years old. Actually, she couldn't be considered a young girl, but when used on her, it didn't seem out of place at all. Chapter 21:30. Yi Muyun's gaze had been on her face the entire time, not shifting away at all. She, on the other hand, stood there, frozen and motionless. Because she had never thought that he would appear here. Yi Muyun smiled, looked past her and said softly, "It's my girlfriend's art gallery. You should know each other." Cher's eyes were still fixed on him as if she did not hear what he said. At this moment, there was only one person in her world named Yi Muyun. However, a moment later, Song Karen appeared beside him. He put his arm around Song Karen's shoulders and introduced her gently, "Cher, this is my girlfriend." Song Karen was surprised and delighted. She turned her head and looked at him. "You know each other?" "Very well. He's my brother." Almost at the same time Yi Muyun and Cher spoke at the same time. Song Karen's face was full of surprise. "Really? That's such a coincidence." "Yes, it is." Yi Muyun's eyes were still fixed on Cher's face and he said calmly, "We haven't seen each other for 8 years. Song Karen did not suspect anything. She smiled and held his hand. "Then you two have a good chat. I'll go and entertain the guests." Yi Muyun tilted her head and glanced at her. Suddenly, she pulled her closer and hugged her shoulders. "Let's have lunch together." Song Karen blushed, nodded and left. After she left, Yi Muyun looked at Schwenger. Schwenger's complexion didn't look too good. It was pale and bloodless. In fact, she was wearing a black jumpsuit today, which made her waist look slender and her hands look white. It was very eye-catching except for her pale face. "Are you surprised that I have a girlfriend?" Yi Muyun walked up to her and whispered in her ear. His voice was very soft, but there was a dangerous tension in it. Cher looked up and looked at him nervously. There was a touch of moisture in her eyes that he was familiar with. He thought she would cry. But she didn't. She forced back the tears in her eyes. She said calmly, "Congratulations." "Really?" His voice turned cold as he stared into her eyes. "Yes, why would you care? You don't have a heart." For 8 years, there was no news at all. She was really heartless. She must have known that he had a girlfriend, which was why she came back. However, she never thought that this person was the Song Karen she knew. Schwenger lowered her eyes and smiled faintly. "Perhaps." "Excuse me," she murmured. "I'll be away." She turned around but her hand was held by him. Yi Muyun said sternly, "Do you want to leave again?" She looked at him holding her hand and was silent for a moment. "Yi Muyun, I don't remember much about the past." She finally raised her eyes and looked at him bravely. "A lot of things can change in 8 years. For example, you have a girlfriend now." There was a warm smile on her face. "I want you to be happy." Her tone was very calm, as if she was exchanging pleasantries with someone she hadn't seen for a long time. It made him look exasperated and petty. He should be angry. All these years he had been angry at her. But now, when he said that he had a girlfriend in front of her, she was so calm. 8 years. Had she really changed? His handsome face was slightly distorted as he looked at the face that had disappeared for 8 years. Chapter 21:31. With that she walked out of the room. And he had no reason to keep her, and his pride wouldn't allow her to do so. He looked at her back and closed his eyes. 8 years was indeed enough to change a lot of things. For example, changing a person. In the past she was so transparent in front of him. But now the words that she said were true and false. He could barely tell them apart. He stood there for half an hour before Song Karen appeared and said softly, "And then left first. I asked her to have lunch together, but she said she had something to do." Yi Muyun said calmly, "I might have something to deal with at noon." Song Karen was stunned for a moment, and disappointment immediately appeared on her face. But she immediately adjusted herself and appeared very generous. "I'm fine, let's meet another day." She was already satisfied that he could come here today. When Yi Muyun left, the reporters' hearts were as clear as a mirror. Today it was clear who was the female lead and who was the supporting female lead. Mr. Yi didn't appear here for Song Karen, did he? Yi Muyun's car left immediately. As he drove, he called Song Karen, "Send me the information on ANN's paintings, I want to buy them all." Song Karen smiled on the other side. "Muyun, are you doing this because of the favor or because you admire her paintings?" Yi Muyun softly spat out 2 words, "A favor?" Song Karen pretended to be angry. "You treat Ann so well, I'm going to be jealous?" Yi Muyun's voice was a little faint. "I grew up with her." Although his words were faint in Song Karen's ears, it was almost like an explanation. Her voice suddenly softened. "Muyun, I trust you." Yi Muyun slowly put down the phone in his hand. Trust him? How ironic. He gripped the steering wheel tightly and drove in the direction of Peiyuan. He guessed that she must be staying in Peiyuan when she returned to B City. However, when he returned to Peiyuan, he only saw Sister Li and the servants. Cher didn't come back to stay. Sister Li didn't even know she was back. She asked Yi Muyun, "Miss, why didn't you go home when you came back? This child has been gone for so many years. I don't know if he can get used to eating fast food outside. Without Sister Li's soup to nourish him, I don't know how thin his body has become." The image of Cher appeared in Yi Muyun's mind. She had indeed lost weight. He didn't say anything and just smoked his cigarette lightly. Sister Li was furious. She snatched the cigarette away from him and stomped on it twice. "Look at you 2 little ones. When do I not worry about you? One is abroad and the other is here sulking all day long, living like a monk. I don't have one." Yi Muyun reached out and pressed his Sister Li's shoulder. He smiled helplessly. "I have a girlfriend. Who are you trying to fool?" Sister Li said bluntly, "You are a serious girlfriend. Why didn't you bring her back to let your family see her?" All these years, although the young master didn't live in Peiyuan, he was still a member of the Tang family. When Mr. Tang was at home, the young master often came to visit. She could see that he even hoped to see Miss come back. He had been looking forward to it for 8 years. Sister Li didn't know what to say. She could only sigh. Miss is very vengeful. The young master had a girlfriend, so she couldn't let Miss know. Yi Muyun smiled lightly. Actually, Sister Li, I am also very vengeful. Chapter 21:32. Yi Muyun smiled faintly. Actually, Sister Li, I'm quite vengeful too. Sister Li glared at him. Don't even think about it. Yi Muyun had wanted him to stay for dinner, but he still left. He returned to his apartment and made a call. Can you help me find out where she is staying? Not long after, the other side replied, Miss Tang is staying in the presidential suite of GM Hotel. Yi Muyun was stunned. That place. He had stayed there for a while when he had just moved out. Later on, he had bought his own apartment and hadn't been there since. That was where they had stayed on the night of their engagement. That night he had wanted her for the whole night. Those scalding memories were still burning his heart and his body, making him feel uncomfortably tense. Got it, he finally said and slowly put down the phone. He stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window of his apartment and looked outside. From here he could see the GM Hotel. And she was not far from him. What was she doing? Why didn't she go home? Was it because she was avoiding him? Did she not know that he had moved away? Or did his presence make her uncomfortable? Lee Moo-yoon closed his eyes. When he opened them again he felt a little pain. He stood there for a while and his phone rang. He took it out almost immediately. After looking at it he was still disappointed. It was a call from Song Karen. He picked it up and heard Song Karen say, "Moo-yoon Enen's works are not for sale." Her voice was a little weak. She was probably afraid that he would be unhappy. Lee Moo-yoon paused for a while before saying, "Make an offer until she is willing to sell." Song Karen was stunned. After a while she held her breath and said, "Moo-yoon, what's wrong? Are you unhappy?" She asked hesitantly, "Do you need me to accompany you now?" She wouldn't let go of any opportunity to get close to him, even if he thought she wasn't reserved. Because she knew that he had always been indifferent towards her and didn't seem too satisfied. Because he was too outstanding and had too many choices, but she only had one chance. No need. He spat out a few words and hung up the phone. He thought that he should break up with Song Karen. Once upon a time, when he was in despair, he had also thought of finding a woman to marry. That way he wouldn't have to wait any longer. Marrying a woman, having a child, even if she came back, he would not divorce her. Once everything was settled, his life would not change because of her. Song Karen had always been by his side. However, even though she had been by his side for 2 to 3 years, he had never made up his mind. Instead, he hated the person who had left him more and more. What right did she have to torture him for 8 years? 8 years. How many eights did he and she have? She left decisively and returned without a care in the world. His heart was filled with resentment, but he had no way to vent it. He found that compared to 8 years ago he was more passive. 8 years ago she was a little girl who was scared to death of him. 8 years later she was mature enough to stand up to him. An enhanced version of an idiot. He stood there quietly, his head lowered as he scrolled through his phone. Her number was still in his contact list. Idiot, he pressed his finger lightly and dialed the number. Over the years he had tried to call her again and again, but her phone had always been turned off. But now it actually went through. At that moment he wanted to give up, but she had already picked up. She said calmly, "I'm not selling that painting." Lee Moo-yoon said mockingly, 10 million. Chapter 2133. Lee Moo-yoon's voice was indifferent. "But I really like that painting. Most importantly, it's adorable." There was a long silence on the other end before Cher said, "It's not for sale to anyone. What if I'm the one renovating the wedding house?" His voice was very, very soft. Cher's breathing was very soft. She almost couldn't believe what she had just heard. He said wedding house. He and Song Karen were getting married? Cher's phone slid down, but the call didn't end. On the other end, Lee Moo-yoon didn't hang up either. Although he couldn't hear her voice, he knew it was her on the other end. A world that was very, very close. After a very, very long time, the phone was picked up again. Her voice said, "Congratulations, brother." With that, she hung up the phone. But he heard a hint of nasal sound in her voice. Did she cry? Lee Moo-yoon closed his eyes slightly. She still cared, didn't she? He stood there from dawn to dusk with extremely complicated feelings. Then he looked at his phone and made a call. Song Karen was very surprised when she received his call. "Moo-yoon? Do you have time?" Lee Moo-yoon's voice was calm. He thought it would be better for him to talk to Song Karen in person. He had been with her for so long because he wanted to forget someone, but he hadn't succeeded. And now he couldn't maintain that kind of relationship with Cher at the same time. Song Karen's voice was very soft. "The exhibition has just ended. Moo-yoon, let's go to the restaurant we went to last time, okay?" As for her last request, he still agreed. Because of his attitude, Song Karen boldly asked, "Moo-yoon, I'm still in the restaurant. Can you come and pick me up?" For the first time she acted coquettishly. "My legs are sore from wearing high heels all day." "Okay," Lee Moo-yoon replied very quickly. Song Karen couldn't believe it. She even thought that perhaps he would propose to her tonight. After all, they were already of marriageable age. She smiled faintly and touched up her makeup with lipstick to cheer herself up. When Lee Moo-yoon arrived, Song Karen smiled and stepped forward. getting into the black sports car. She sat beside him looking a little shy, but he didn't say anything. When the black sports car arrived at the restaurant, it was already 8:30. As night fell, the parking lot was filled with the neon lights of B-City. The night was a little cold. When Song Karen got off the car, he rubbed his bare arms. It's a little cold. Yi Muyun wasn't someone who didn't have a bit of humanity, so he took off his jacket and handed it to Song Karen. Although she didn't do it herself, she was satisfied. Yi Muyun put on his coat and walked to the atrium of the restaurant. However, he had only taken a few steps when he stopped. It was Zhao Yan and Xuan. They walked side by side. Cher put her hand on Zhao Yan's arm and looked up at him. At this moment, her little face was full of vigor, not pale like when she saw him. Zhao Yan lowered his head and looked at her with a very gentle gaze. When Yi Muyun heard her call Zhao Yan little uncle, her tone was just like how she used to call him big brother. At that moment, his heart was filled with jealousy. Song Karen smiled and greeted, and what a coincidence. She looked at Zhao Yan beside her. Is this your boyfriend? At this moment, Song Karen really wanted the whole world to be as happy as she was. Chapter 2134. Cher stopped in her tracks and looked at them. The smile on her face was a little stiff. She looked at Yi Muyun's jacket covering Song Karen. He was indeed with Song Karen. She smiled bitterly in her heart. It had been 8 years. It wasn't strange for him to have a girlfriend. Besides, no, he's my uncle. Cher forced a smile. Song Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. Cher didn't say anything else. She held Zhao Yan's arm and said in a low voice, "Let's go in." Zhao Yan glanced at Yi Muyun and then at Song Karen. He seemed to have understood something. In the past few years he knew that Yi Muyun had a stable girlfriend, but he had never seen her. He didn't expect to see her after Cher came back. Zhao Yan and Feng Jiu's appearance. Muyun, let's eat together. Yi Muyun's gaze fell on Cher's face for a moment before he said mildly, okay. He reached out and took Song Karen's hand. Let's go in. Song Karen's face instantly turned red. She thought that An was his family and Zhao Yan was his friend. Did this mean that she had been acknowledged? Her steps were a little light and she couldn't help but feel happy inside. The group entered together. Because Zhao Yan was the boss, he immediately arranged the best seats. The four of them sat at the same table. It was a delicate scene. Zhao Yan and Cher had grown up together and were related by blood. Over the past few years, they had been in contact with each other in America. He knew her diet like the back of his hand and naturally decided what she wanted to eat for her. Yi Muyun listened to Zhao Yan's voice. His eyes narrowed and he looked straight at Cher. If they weren't related by blood, he would have thought that they were together. Cher had been quiet the whole time. She wasn't like the little girl who always pestered him to talk. She had changed. She had become less talkative. He controlled himself and didn't look at her all the time. He pretended that the past was in the past. She could do that, so could he. During the meal, only Song Karen was talking. Cher would occasionally say a few words. Zhao Yan suddenly stood up. Excuse me. I'll go up and play a song. Cher raised her head and smiled. Okay. Zhao Yan asked with his eyes, is there really no problem? After all, he was the man she had loved for so long and she might still love him now. Moreover, there was another woman by his side. Cher shook her head. Zhao Yan was the same age as her, but because he was an elder, he doted on her a lot. Sometimes, it was the younger generation who doted on her. He caressed her long hair and kissed her forehead. I'll be back in a while. Cher watched him leave. She looked down and heard Song Karen laughing happily, and, are you really related to Zhao Yan? I think you two are a good match. Cher forced a smile. Really? She didn't look at Yi Muyun because she knew he was looking at her. She lifted her eyes and looked at Zhao Yan who was on the stage. His hands were placed on the piano keys, his long fingers gliding over. The audience was a little excited. Because it was Die Sir Alice. Such a song always had a deeper meaning. It was said that Zhao Yan came with a beautiful girl. When Cher heard him play this song, she was also stunned. She remembered playing this song when she and Yi Muyun got engaged. That night in the hotel suite, this song was played the whole night. Chapter 2135. Zhao Yan looked over and smiled at her. There were tears in Cher's eyes. She smiled too. Little uncle. He was always so good at comforting her. He knew what she was thinking. In fact, the two people sitting opposite her already made her feel terrible, but she had no choice but to sit there. She didn't want to admit defeat. She didn't want to run away every time she saw Yi Muyun. Zhao Yin was still playing. Song Karen was mesmerized. She turned to Yi Muyun and said, "Muyun, let's use this song for our engagement, okay?" The atmosphere became more subtle. Yi Muyun looked at Cher and said slowly, "Cher, what do you think?" Cher's gaze fell on his face. There was a hint of moisture in her eyes. After a long time she said softly, "It's up to you." Song Karen looked at Yi Muyun expectantly. "Let's talk about it later." Yi Muyun didn't give a direct answer and said lightly. The sparkle in Song Karen's eyes dimmed. She felt a little uncomfortable. After all, her behavior just now seemed like a forced marriage. However, she could tell that Muyun and Ann had a good relationship. Muyun always asked for Ann's opinion on everything. So she thought that she should make an appointment with Ann alone and persuade her to put in a good word for her. At this moment, Zhao Yin came back and sat down. He stroked Cher's hair. "Do you like it?" Cher smiled weakly. "I like it." Zhao Yin smiled like a prince on a white horse. He had a gentle temperament, unlike Yi Muyun's fierce temperament. He didn't hide his love and pampering for Cher. He showed it openly in front of Yi Muyun. He was Cher's little uncle. It was natural for him to treat her well. "When Cher gets married in the future, little uncle will play for you at the wedding?" He looked doting. Song Karen was very envious. Although Yi Muyun was very outstanding, he was also very cold. Which girl didn't like a boyfriend who doted on them? And if only I had an uncle like him. Song Karen's words were not without meaning, but there was also a hint of complaint. However, as she spoke, she smiled at Yi Muyun. There was a very sweet feeling in her smile. Cher smiled faintly. "Do you think you can call him Mr. Yi, little uncle?" Song Karen almost spat out a mouthful of dessert. She had never thought that the cold and aloof Ann would make such a joke. So for a moment she didn't know what to say. Yi Muyun took a deep look at Cher and didn't say anything. The atmosphere was still subtle. Only Song Karen felt that it was a good family gathering. She even suggested that the two groups go to the movies together, but Zhao Yin rejected it. He smiled. "Cher needs to sleep early. I will send her back to the hotel later." Song Karen sighed with a look of pity. "All right, I will go with Muyun." Maybe it was tonight that gave her courage. She felt that she could finally become a regular employee, and not a girlfriend who only had one meal a week. Yi Muyun didn't say anything, and his expression was a little unpredictable. Zhao Yin had finished the last mouthful of wine. He stood up and pulled out the chair for Cher. "It's getting late. I will send you back early." He paused and suddenly said, "It's not convenient to stay in the hotel. Do you want to move in with me?" You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.